Well, good evening. We are excited to be on our first evening for our Learn to Hunt series for upland birds. We've got a great group of panelists with us tonight. Some experienced people that know a thing or two about bird hunting and group like Pheasants Forever. So we're excited to be putting on this workshop for you all tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping items as we get going. You're going to have the chance to interact with us virtually through the chat feature. So if you'll take a look at your screen down towards the bottom, you'll see a window for Q&A. That's a great place to start by dropping your questions in. We're going to be doing a couple of things with our questions tonight. We will be answering those live as well as over the chat feature. So feel free to add those questions in whenever you get the chance. We're going to pick out a couple of lucky winners tonight. They'll be getting a Iowa Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever t-shirt mailed to them. So if you submit a question tonight, you'll be in the running for one of those t-shirts. And we've got them in basically small and large sizes only. So make sure you drop your questions in there. So some introductions. I'll start off. My name is Jamie Cook. I serve as the state coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever here in Iowa. Been with the organization about 3 years. I get to do these programs with Iowa DNR as part of my day-to-day job. And it's not just pheasant classes and upland bird classes that I get to help out with. We've also been doing courses on waterfowl, also been doing courses on mourning dove. We have a trapping series coming up soon if you want to, if you're interested in learning more about trapping. And then we'll have a small game, hopefully slotted for sometime in early November. So stay tuned. You'll be getting some more information about those opportunities with a lot of your follow-up email coming up in the next couple of weeks. So again, let's get to some other introductions. I'll have everyone wave, and then we'll go through a few things as we going. With us tonight, Amy Buckendahl. Amy, would you wave again at the screen? Amy's a board member with the North Polk Pheasants Forever chapter. She's going to be discussing tonight one of the latter sessions on gear. So we're excited to have Amy with us tonight. We also have Todd Bogenschutz. Todd, you want to take a wave there? Todd gives 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. Todd is the upland game biologist for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So we're excited to have him here tonight. He'll be kicking us off here in a few minutes on habitat and history of pheasants and doing a lot of the biology talk, and also cover some public land opportunities in our Iowa's IHAP program. Also with us tonight is Dustin Amy. Dustin, take a wave. Dustin is one of our dedicated conservation officers. He is also minoring in interior design. As you can see, Dustin's done a great job setting up tonight. I think he's even outdone me, and here I've worked for the organization. So Dustin, excited to have you on tonight, man. Last but certainly not least is Eric Sitzma. Eric is a co-worker of mine. He is the regional representative for our organization here in Iowa. He covers the southern half of our state. So again, we're excited for all of the panelists tonight, and they'll be joining us throughout the evening, one at a time, and chiming in through virtual chat as well. So thanks again. Before we get going into what I refer to as the meat and potatoes, we wanted to cover just a few things. These things are exciting. We have 8, that's this many fingers. We have 8 states represented tonight through our registration system. We've got neighbors. Obviously, Iowa is in the hunt tonight, but we've got Illinois. We've got people tuning in from Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Kansas. Those are our neighbors, right? So, hey, neighbors. But we've also got some distant states chiming in tonight as well, tuning in. We have Pennsylvania. Hello, Pennsylvania. We've got Texas. Hey, y'all. And we've got California. So we're excited to have people from the state of California and shore to shore, really. Pennsylvania's almost there, right? But again, 8 states represented tonight. We're excited. This is a great turnout. We've had over 72 people registered, and right now we've still got people coming in moment by moment. So why do we offer these courses? Hopefully, if you've had the chance to look through some of the descriptions on this program, they're designed to teach some basics. You're not going to learn everything you need to know about pheasant hunting here tonight as part of this workshop. The only real way to do that is to get out in the field and start trying it for yourself. And hopefully after tonight, we as an organization are going to rally and hopefully get you a chance to get out in the field this fall and have a chance to maybe be mentored or join another group, another chapter in the field on a hunt for yourself this fall. So we're excited about that opportunity. But you're only going to learn by getting out and continuing to try it, continue to experiment, do things safely, smartly, and that's going to be the key purpose of this course. So tonight we're going to be covering habitat and history. We're going to be covering regulations. We're going to be covering gear, and that's going to include what to wear as well as shotguns and different ammunition. And so before we get to that, next on our list is Eric Sitzma. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the Habitat organization and some of the specific things that it's been accomplishing here in Iowa and across the country. Eric?
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so I'm just going to give you a little background on the organization, how we work and what we do. Like you said, my name's Eric Sitzma. I'm currently living in Oskaloosa, Iowa, and I've been with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever for a little over 10 years now. So for those of you who don't know, Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever is a conservation nonprofit, and it is a unique conservation nonprofit in that we have a unique fundraising model. So we have volunteer chapters across the country, all the way from Minnesota to Texas and California over to New York. And those volunteers on those chapters do different events throughout the year to raise money. And the reason that our model is unique is those chapters retain control of that money and then can use it for all kinds of different projects, whether that be sponsoring mentored hunting events like this one or in-person events, habitat projects with private landowners or with our partners at state and federal game agencies and management units. We do a lot of partnerships here in Iowa with the Iowa DNR and with our local county conservation board system. So it's a really unique model, and what it does is it allows our local volunteers to raise that money and use it directly in their communities on habitat projects and education and outreach projects. So we've got just a hair over 740 chapters and over 130,000 members nationwide. Here in Iowa, we've got 103 chapters and just shy of 18,000 members where we sit right now. So just as a little bit of a scope for all the conservation work that we do, we have raised and spent $929+ million on conservation projects since we were started in 1982. In Iowa, we've raised and spent over $60 million on habitat projects, which does include land acquisition. We work a lot with our partners at the DNR and the Natural Heritage Foundation to acquire ground and open up access for public hunting and recreation. And in addition to that, being a non-governmental agency, a nonprofit, allows us the freedom to partner and use that money for grant match and things like that. So that gets us access to a lot of program funds through federal and state grant monies that we can use to partner on projects and land acquisitions. So in addition to that, we're very active in the hunting and conservation community. We work with a lot of our hunter ed classes. And, our number one goal is to make habitat on the ground and to try to help more folks get out and experience the wildlife habitat that we're able to get on the ground. So this is a great opportunity. I'm glad, like Jamie mentioned, Amy is one of my chapter volunteers here in Central Iowa, and her chapter does an exceptional job of getting new hunters outside every single year. I've been to their events and they're very, very good. So be excited for her sections. And yeah, I'm excited to have some new folks on here. And excited that we could be a part of it.
Thank you, Eric. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on, Eric, was just membership. We talk quite a bit about members, and I know we can be members of anything. And you know, I think with our organization, those dollars, just like you mentioned, they come in the door, they go right to critical mission funding, and they result in great things like habitat, land acquisitions. You did a great job of teeing that up. So I believe Megan had shared on the link our website. You can find out more information at iowapf.net. If you're interested, feel free to drop it in the chat box, but we can send you information about becoming a member. With membership, obviously you get a quarterly magazine called the Pheasants Forever Journal, and it's packed with great stories from the field, hunting tips. It's even got tips about home decor in there, Dustin. You need to do some decorating. But it's a great magazine, and I'm not just saying that because I work for the organization.
I'd also point out while you're on that, Jamie, for the folks who are down in Missouri and Kansas and Texas, you could also do a $35 membership to Quail Forever. The last magazine just came out, and it's honestly, I think it's the best one we've done yet. But your membership does get you the magazine, but it also gets you linked up with your local volunteer chapter. And that means you'll get heads up when they're doing events, whether it be a habitat work day on a local property, or whether they're going to be doing a hunting class or a fundraising event. So that basically links you up with your local chapter and makes it possible that they can communicate with you.
Yeah. Great stuff, Eric. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks for taking a few minutes to talk about the Habitat organization. One really neat thing, as Eric hops off here, my position as the state coordinator is somewhat unique. And what I mean by that is Eric alluded to it earlier, but our organization's really vested in the idea of what we refer to as R3, recruitment, retention, reactivation. And essentially what that means is organizations like PF, when partnered with the Iowa DNR, work really hard at trying to do some great things for hunter recruitment, hunter retention, and reactivation of those hunters. In other words, since the 1980s, we've begun to see a steady decline in hunters. And not to get too far ahead of Todd's talk, but I'm guessing Todd may mention a little bit of that tonight about hunter decline and how that's played into harvest numbers with pheasants over the years. But anyway, since the 80s, we've really seen a decline in hunting. It's become harder and harder to find places to hunt. The family farm is not the family farm much anymore. It's not as accessible, and there's a lot of barriers when it comes to getting new people into the field and learning how to hunt. And so going back to my position, thanks to the Iowa DNR, I'm sitting in this seat right now, and I'm getting to work for the organization known as Pheasants Forever to do just that, to put together these learn to hunt workshops and different activities. And so the point in all of this is that when you purchase your hunting license, your fishing license, when you go out and you buy ammunition, when you go out and you buy equipment, there are taxes and fees that are associated with those purchases that help fund conservation. They help fund wildlife projects at the state level through the state agency like the Iowa DNR. And then they also help special projects out with being able to do particular R3 and hunter education related activities. So those purchases that you make go way beyond the counter and way beyond just allowing you to harvest a deer or to bag a bird this season. So keep that in mind. We're certainly always going to be working hard to bring new people into hunting. And that's not just for Pheasants Forever, but again, my position wouldn't be possible without the help of the Iowa DNR, who's really leading the efforts, not only in our state, but regionally and nationally. Just got an exceptional team of people there to work with. So with that said, just keep in mind that license dollars go a long way. And with that, I will stop our portion and we will get into the introduction and history of pheasants with Todd Bogenschutz. So Todd, you can hop on here, sir, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jamie, for that introduction. As Jamie mentioned, I'm Todd Bogenschutz. I'm the upland game biologist for the Iowa DNR. So part of my responsibility are pheasants and quail, and so that's a passion of mine. I love upland game birds. So gonna share my screen now. And we can talk a little bit about ringneck pheasants and bobwhite quail in the great state of Iowa. And so we've got about 30 minutes, Jamie tells me. I have 20 slides, so I'll be going through them pretty quickly. So if you have questions, just jot them down, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to get to them. Just to give you a brief overview, Jamie asked me to talk about the history of both species in Iowa, hunting them, talk a little bit about IDing them and biology, a little bit about weather and habitat, and also about, what kind of habitat we want to look for hunting. So you can see here on this screen, pheasants are a grassland bird. This is a young brood here, probably about half to 3/4 grown. You can see the grassland in the background here, and of course the cropland. That's really what pheasants like to see, a nice interspersion of those two habitat types. So a little bit about the history of pheasant hunting in Iowa. So pheasants are actually native to Asia. They were brought over to North America about, I want to say around 1870s in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. They brought wild birds over from China and got them going there. And they were successfully introduced to Iowa about 1900. Actually, they were accidentally released when a large game farm over in Cedar Falls was wrecked by a windstorm and liberated about 2,000 birds. Shortly after that, the Iowa Conservation Commission began releasing birds around the state as well. They did very well. Our first hunting season was in 1925. It was in 13 counties up there in north central Iowa. You see the 1925 map here, and it was 3 days. And what spurred the season was crop depredation complaints from landowners. And matter of fact, farmers had gathered 60,000 wild eggs for the Conservation Commission that year for distribution to other counties, for farmers to hatch them under their local chickens in the barn and for release in their county. So obviously they did extremely well in only 25 years. They very much liked the landscape of Iowa. You can see that as the years progressed, more regions of the state were opened. Some had a longer season, some had a shorter season, and actually in these early years, because we didn't have much science on the species, they even allowed the harvesting of hens, if you can believe it, from about 1929 to 1943. But as science came on, we got a little bit better understanding of how the population worked, and so we didn't allow hen harvest anymore, but they continued to expand across the state until the entire state was open for hunting in 1976. Now, the regulations have been more or less the same since that time. Our shooting hours and daily bag limits really have been unchanged since 1963. So a lot of that, again, is what we've learned by studying the birds and putting a little science behind how we manage them. So a little bit about the history of quail hunting in the great state of Iowa. Bobwhite are native to Iowa. We don't know much about their distribution prior to settlement. Not a lot of great records back around 1800, but best we can tell, they were likely restricted to mostly the southern part of the state at settlement. But they really favored more areas of the state when white settlers moved in and started cultivating the state. And pretty much they spread all the way to northern Iowa and even up into the southern part of Minnesota. Now, a lot of this was due to the practices at the time. 1820s, 1830s, land grant and settlers were given a quarter section. They didn't have a lot of money and they couldn't afford fence and there wasn't a lot of trees in the prairie, so they planted tens of thousands of miles of hedge, which is Osage orange, all the way up to the Minnesota border on the prairie, or what had been prairie. And this really favored quail because quail are very much a brush, and they need that brush component to have abundant populations. And these hedgerows were within 10 quail steps of woody-laden crop fields. So kind of put a new rich food source that historically hadn't been there. So quail responded very well to the settlement of Iowa. Matter of fact, from 1830 to 1880 was considered the golden age of Iowa quail abundance. They were so abundant that in southern Iowa, people would just walk fields, and there's so many quail that they would just funnel them into these lead nets and walk them right into a trap and sell them for market. So you got to remember, back in those times, there wasn't any restrictions on trapping. You could sell wild game to markets for food. Actually, one of the first regulations was 1857, and you couldn't hunt quail from February to July. Prior to that, you could hunt them year round. And I think we know what kind of impacts that probably would have on nesting birds and young birds. As farming became more efficient, the population started to decline. Of course, we had more people settling and more land was being plowed up. And so by 1872, there was a ban on trapping quail. And then by 1879, one of the first game laws in Iowa was they put a daily bag limit of 25 quail per day. Prior to that, there had been no limit on the number you could shoot per day. So we got to remember, those were different times back then. There were no cars. Cars didn't show up till after the 1900s. No tractors, no electricity. Corn was picked by hand. There was, it was very much horse, and so this created very favorable habitat for quail statewide, and so that's why it's referred to the golden age of quail. But, as we became more mechanized and more intensive in the cultivation of the land, we had a lot of habitat loss, and there was big declines in quail, so much that by 1916, the state legislature actually closed the quail season till 1933. And, I think a lot of the thought was it was because of hunting, because of trapping, but they'd already put restrictions in place to that effect, and yet they still saw quail populations continuing to decline, even though there was no hunting at all. And again, that was due to basically more habitat loss. Certainly in those market years, certainly those kinds of things had an impact. But the habitat was so good then and so widespread that the birds still prospered. But when you took away all that habitat, then everything kind of had more bearing. Today, we find quail mostly in southern Iowa. The shooting hours and bag limits, much like pheasants, are more or less been unchanged since about 1964. So I wanted to share a little bit about the species distribution for ringneck pheasants and bobwhite. And so what you're seeing on this map is kind of the National Breeding Bird Survey, and where we consistently see pheasants counted in the United States. And the dark shading in the background is kind of rainfall during the nesting season, with the darker color being the heaviest rainfall, and then lighter shades of gray, and then almost white where we're more kind of desert conditions. And so you can see pheasants are found they don't really like that wet climate, which also leads to much more timber. They like a little bit drier climates, and they tend to like a little bit cooler part of the country. But you can see the pheasants are very much at home in Iowa. They're pretty much consistently found statewide. Now, bobwhite quail are a little bit different. Like I said, they like that brushy component, and so they don't like mature timber, but they like a woody, brushy component, and obviously they tolerate nesting season rainfall much better than pheasants do, but they're not a very winter hardy bird. So you can see that Iowa is kind of on the northern fringe of the quail range in the United States. And so bad winters can certainly impact the populations in Iowa. But as you can see, the populations kind of overlap here in the southern third of the state. And so it is possible to harvest both species in that area of the state, although they do tend to occupy different types of habitat, which I'll touch on here in a minute. So species identification, the ringneck pheasant, and so they're sexually dimorphic, so meaning the male and female do look different, and so the males are quite colorful, and that's because they display in the springtime and try to attract hens. They're polygamous species, which means that one male will breed with many females. So in this regard, they're very much like turkeys. A lot of people are familiar with eastern turkeys, you know, the turkeys gobble, and you know, they usually have a harem of hens around them. Well, pheasants crow in the springtime and do it much the same. They're not as visible. You know, they usually have 1, 2, 3, 5 hens with them. But they're a polygamous species, so they don't form pair bonds. Actually, many hens will breed with more than one rooster in the spring. And so the eggs will be fertilized by different males within the one hen. They only produce one nest per year. They will re-nest if the nest is destroyed. It's been documented that they can nest up to as many as 4 times, but usually twice is more typical. And the males take no part in the nesting effort or raising the young. That's all left to the hens. Now, bobwhite quail, they form pair bonds for breeding. And so the male and female basically pair up and spend the nesting season together. And so they are sexually dimorphic too, although they're not as dimorphic as maybe pheasants are. The males have the white patch on the cheek and the white stripe through the eye, and where the hen is more buff colored. But otherwise, the body is quite similar. The males might have a little bit more white on the chest than the females, but difficult for a lot of people when you flush a covey of quail to tell a male from a female, especially if they're young birds. And unlike pheasants, quail will produce multiple nests in a year. A hen may do a nest and then leave the male to incubate it, and she'll start another nest. So that's something pheasants don't do. You know, the hen will do one nest a year and that's it, but quail have been documented to do, a hen's done 2 nests in a year and done another nest and left it to a male. So in that regard, biologically, so, you know, quail can make a pretty big bounce in a single year because of that multiple nesting effort, which is something pheasants don't have. Like pheasants, if a hen loses her nest, if it's depredated or mowed or whatever, she will re-nest. And similar to pheasants, she may do it 2 or 3 times in a year if her nest is destroyed several times. And like I said, the males do incubate nests and assist the female with raising the brood, which is different than what pheasants do. The ringneck pheasant, as in the distribution map I showed you, is found statewide. Only roosters may be harvested during the pheasant season. Bobwhite quail, like the distribution map showed, are kind of restricted to mostly the southern third of Iowa, and both sexes can be harvested during the hunting season. And that's because it is kind of difficult to tell them, especially when you flush them and they get 20, 30 yards from you. As I mentioned, bobwhite quail are a coveying species. So like I said, Iowa's on the northern fringe of the range because of their small size. You know, they're about the size of a tennis ball once you take the feathers off them. And so it's hard for them to regulate their body temperature, especially if the winter gets a lot of snow and cold. And so they do this covey. And so they put all their butts together, and that's kind of how they roost in the night. Especially this would be their behavior from late summer until early spring when they break up for nesting. When they break up for nesting, they group up into pairs and you don't see the coveys. But I'd say probably 7, 8 months of the year they're in the covey mode, and you know, except during breeding season when they form pairs. And typically coveys in the fall and winter are about 10 to 12 birds. And so when you hear people talk about hunting quail, they talk about covey rises. And so a lot of times you're flushing a group of birds. Whereas when you're hunting pheasants, you can flush groups, but they'll hang out in groups, but they don't roost like this at night. They roost individually. They're a larger bird, and so they can thermoregulate even when temperatures get cold. But the covey behavior helps quail conserve energy and prosper, this far north in their range. So Jamie asked me to talk about, is there any other species that folks might confuse with quail when you're out there hunting? So this is a picture of a meadowlark, the male and the female, sexually dimorphic, much like quail. But you can see where the female could look somewhat similar to especially a female quail. But usually you find meadowlarks solitary. You don't find them in groups flushing. And you can see they have a much longer bill. And usually they're more in the grassland where you find quail more associated with the brush and the weeds. But you'll find quail out in the grasslands too. And so that's one thing. They're kind of similar in size. Like I said, the meadowlark's a little bit smaller. But that'd be one species that maybe you could confuse with quail when you're hunting. I'm going to talk a little bit about their biology. There's two factors that really control our pheasant and quail populations: weather and habitat. And those things interact to drive our populations. So you can see this is a CRP field, mixed native seeding of CRP. But this was a pretty bad winter, and obviously most of that cover was filled in. So obviously this hen is pretty exposed. I mean, predators could see her pretty easily. And so when we talk about habitat, those are the kinds of things we want to consider. What happens when we have a winter kind of like this. But I'm going to kind of show you kind of the typical population curve of upland game bird population. So we've got 365 days of the year. So here's January 1st, here's December 31st, and this is your population numbers on this graph here. And so you can see there's mortality through the winter. It's a tough time of the year. And then you get into nesting, and there's a little bit more mortality there because the hens can't obviously run away from predators at that point. They got to incubate nests. But when those nests start hatching, you see this big boom in the population when all those chicks come in. And, not all of them survive, so there's a little bit of mortality. And then the population kind of levels off coming into winter, and hopefully if everything stayed the same, your population ends about where it began. But we know from studying the birds that our populations tend to increase with mild winters and warm, dry springs. So we could see a curve like this. So we didn't change the habitat, this is just weather. So it was really mild winter, and we had good hen survival, and then we had really good nesting and chick survival, and the population shoots way up, and we actually finish way above where we would say maybe under average conditions. And conversely, what we've seen is counts decline with snowy winters and cold, wet springs. So again, no change in the habitat on the landscape, but this is what we could see in a really bad winter. A lot of hen loss. So not many nests, not many eggs, and then chick survival is poor, and so the population could finish way below what it would if we'd had average conditions. So these are the kinds of fluctuations we can see in the population in just one year, and mainly due to weather because we didn't change habitat at all. But if we change habitat, what you're doing is you're making, say if we put more habitat out there in the landscape, we're driving this whole curve higher up on this axis. We've got more birds. Obviously, weather can still play the same role here with more habitat. But that kind of shows you the general population curve of both pheasants and quail. So what are our trends in habitat through time? So we're going to go back to about World War II, 1940, and this is millions of acres of potential habitat in Iowa, and these are kind of the habitat types, and particularly for pheasants. Hay is very good for them. You can see back in 1940, we had about 4 million acres in the state. Today, barely even make 1 million acres. Here's our oats and small grains. So you can see that we had, about 6 million acres, 7 million acres on the graph of small grains around World War II for a total of 10 million acres of potential habitat in the state. But you can see today there's virtually none. And then we kind of have set aside programs. If you're a bird hunter today in modern times, of course, CRP is an area where many of us hunt. That program started in 1985 and we had the old soil bank. But how do pheasants trend with that habitat trend? Well, here's our pheasant counts in Iowa. And you can see that if you put a line through here, these counts here would be downward, very much matches the loss of habitat that we had. CRP came on and kind of moved our habitat from about 3 million acres just prior to 1985 and shot us back up to 5 million acres. And you can see there was kind of a response to the population of that habitat of an upward trend. And then, you know, our habitats continue to decline, and you can see our populations have declined with that additional loss of habitat. But you see all this noise from year to year. That's kind of the impact of bad winters or good winters, and springs vice versa. So again, quail show these very similar trends to pheasants when we look at our statewide surveys and our trends. And of course, they respond to good winters and bad winters, just like pheasants do. So let's shift into the habitat needs. So here's a CRP field, and I really like this picture because it kind of shows a CRP field that's had some management. So very much more 4B here, more grass dominated here, and that's going to be important. Why? Because both need year-round habitat for nesting and brood rearing, and they also need winter cover and food. They are year-round residents, so we've got to think about all that. Pheasants have a home range of about 160 to 300 acres, depending. They prefer grassy wetland habitats, and they kind of like ranker, thicker cover. Quail, they have a much smaller home range, you know, 20 acres to 80 acres. And like I said, they're really keyed in on that shrubby, brushy cover. Matter of fact, in the wintertime, radio research on quail has shown that they seldom are more than 70 feet from shrubby, brushy cover in the wintertime. And they don't like rank cover. They like more open cover. And so I like this picture in the background here because the grassy part is probably better nesting habitat, but the 4B part of it is actually better brood rearing habitat. So a lot of people think of them as one and the same, and they can be. It's not that the birds won't nest in the 4B cover, and it's not that broods won't feed in the grassy cover, but generally there's just kind of a distinction there. Nesting kind of works better in grassy covers, and brood rearing works better in 4B cover. So here's some diagrams of both nests. Here's a pheasant nest, a first nest. Typically they have about 11 to 12 eggs. And if you can see in here, here's a quail nest right where my pointer is. They have white eggs where the pheasants have more of a buffy colored egg. The chicks are, especially quail chicks, are very small at hatch. And so really about the size of a bumblebee. Not a very big critter when they first hatch. You know, a pheasant chick might be the size of a ping pong ball when it hatches. So again, this kind of really relates, especially if you look at this quail picture here. Thick rank cover doesn't work well for chicks, you know, and their foraging and their ability to forage effectively. Thick rank cover is really good for probably both species in the winter, but you know, at this time of the year during nesting and brood rearing, they have a little different requirements. Both like grassy habitats for nesting, and both like more 4B areas and a lot of bare ground, like the quail chick here, so that the chicks can move freely and forage effectively. They have tremendous growth rates, both species. The chicks can make short flights at 10 to 14 days. So that's a tremendous growth rate because they're born without any wing feathers or anything at hatch. So that kind of growth rate and muscle mass and feather growth requires pretty protein-rich diets. And the diets of both species are basically insects, pure protein. That leads to that very fast growth rate. But like I said, to have abundant insects, you really like to see a grass forb kind of mix. And of course, the chicks have got to be able to get to those bugs. And that's where the bare ground and stuff is kind of very important. So I'm going to talk about the general habitat needs. I've talked about the nesting part of it, so I like to use pictures to demonstrate that. So what we can see is some grass covers over here. We got some native switchgrass, which is very tall and rank, and then we have some brome grass, which is much shorter. And then we kind of have mixed native grass with some flowers and big blue stem, little blue stem. And so not all grass is created equal. You know, this is probably ideal nesting and potentially brood rearing cover. This is probably much more nesting cover, and this is obviously a very good winter cover. Now, will pheasants nest in all three of these? Sure they will. Will they forage chicks? Sure they will. But like I said, when we're trying to think about management, you know, we try to optimize things to provide for all their habitat needs. Here's a young chick foraging, kind of a little bit more open ground, a lot of forbs and grass. And here's a chick in rank cover with a circle around it here. You can see how this guy is probably going to struggle. It's just tough for him to get through there to even feed, let alone get bugs. And there's probably not as many bugs in this as there is in something that's more diverse. Now, as we jump to wintertime, obviously we want to see good cover for pheasants. Cattails are great cover. You know, this switchgrass over here, the mixed natives can be good cover. But when we have our really bad winters, even cattails can fill in, and you can see our mixed natives fill in, and obviously the birds are very exposed. So that's where we think about things like switchgrass here in the background. And of course, in our bad winters for pheasants, we even think about you know, woody plantings like conifers and shrubs. Pheasants don't like tall timber. They like that brushy, if they have to use it. Pheasants prefer to roost in grasslands, but when the winters get so bad and those covers are filled in, they will roost in shrubby cover. And so, and if you have a food plot next to it, that's even better. We don't want the birds getting very exposed, you know, having to go out and feed. So habitat needs for quail, like I said, they're very much focused on that shrubby component. And actually, if you want to have abundant quail, you need a lot of that shrubby component in the landscape. So you can see in these photos here, a lot of the shrubby components. That's just what quail need. They're very tied to that, especially in the fall and winter time. And like I said, they really like that bare ground, that forby component. If it's associated with some agriculture, that's even better. You know, that's just because they can't handle that rank cover like adult pheasants. And so, you know, well-managed CRP with some disturbance in it creates ideal quail habitat, especially if there's that shrubby component associated with it. Well, my last, to wrap up, kind of, Jamie wanted to talk about what should you look for when you're hunting, because that's what this show is about and this webinar is about. And so to be a successful hunter, you need to be hunting in the right regions of the state for your species, whether it's pheasants or quail. And obviously you need areas with good habitat. Pheasants are mainly a grassland bird, some good natives out here, a little bit more diverse with some forbs in here. Very open landscape. Pheasants don't like timber, so this young man chose pretty good habitat for his first bird, I believe. So where are good areas to hunt in the state? Well, the DNR conducts a roadside survey every year. We do about 200 routes every year. We drive about 6,000 miles and count all the pheasant broods we see, and this is actually a couple quail broods here in southern Iowa. And so when we get done conducting that survey, and you're coming into the fall, we produce these distribution maps. And so it kind of gives you where our better numbers we're seeing in the state. And so obviously as a hunter, you know, this may be important to you. Maybe you're willing to travel and go to some of the better areas, or maybe you just live here and you're just wondering how the birds compare this year to a year ago. But we post this information on our website annually, usually around the 1st of September. And so this is a great resource. A lot of our non-resident hunters definitely look at this, but also our resident hunters use it quite a bit. And so again, you know, if you're going to hunt quail, you're probably going to be hunting down here in the southern part of the state, because up in the northern part of the state, we don't count any. We just don't have the habitat up there for them, and the winters are too tough for them up there. But you can see there's areas where maybe you could find both pheasants and quail. Just depends if you're hunting the right habitat types. So what's an ideal habitat type to hunt pheasants? Well, you want the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen all in about the same quarter section. And so to me, this is an awesome picture. So we got nesting cover over here. It's kind of mixed natives with a forb component. I call this the living room. This is your nesting and brood rearing area. There's a food plot. This is great for winter cover and winter food. And then you have switchgrass for winter cover and some conifers back here if we get a bad winter. This is where the birds are roosting at night if it's a bad winter. And so the birds can walk out of this and stay kind of concealed and feed and walk back in. If we get a really bad winter, maybe this is all filled in, but these habitats should still be there for the birds. And so this would be my ideal picture of where you'd want to go pheasant hunting. And so a lot of our public lands in the state, we do try to manage for this. But a lot of our private CRP, a lot of times all you'll see is just this part of it, the nesting cover. And so there's going to be birds there. You know, and if we have good years, especially a couple of good nesting seasons or good winters, there can be a lot of birds. But an area like this is probably going to produce birds consistently year in and year out. So what about quail? Well, it's the same thing. We want the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen all in the same spot. And like I said, for quail, they don't cover as big an area. So, you know, you want all this in 20 to 40 to 60 acres. Or pheasants, it can be spread out a little bit more, a quarter section or more. But obviously the shrubby component, there's some edge feathering here to kind of get rid of the tall trees, which quail don't like, and kind of make it more shrubby. So you can drop tall trees and just leave them, and that creates kind of an instant shrubby cover. But this is kind of their bedroom. Of course, you got these CRP along the edge here, nesting cover, high forb content. We like the bare ground, so that's your nesting and brood rearing. And then, of course, quail are always associated with weeds, and if you've got a high energy food source, a food plot right next to it, they've got everything they want. And there certainly should be a covey of quail or maybe two hanging out around this area. So that would be your ideal, you know, quail area to look for. You know, sometimes you're going to have bigger blocks of CRP and not as much brush, but if there's weedy components, you can still find quail, but I'm just showing you what the ideal would be. Generally, when you think about quail, you definitely want to think about that shrubby component though. Now, where to hunt? Well, there's lots of public lands and places to go in Iowa. And so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has lands that are open to public hunting. Of course, we, the Iowa DNR, have land open. We have our walk-in program, which is called IHAP, the Iowa Habitat and Access Program. And many of our county conservation boards also have land that's open to hunting. So we have an online hunting atlas that shows where all these lands are and what they're open for, hunting for, whether it's deer or pheasants. And what species you can find on them. There's a private company that puts out what's called the Iowa Sportsman's Atlas that shows public lands statewide. Again, many of these same lands, maybe not IHAPs, but the others. And then, of course, there's a lot of private CRP in the state, which or other areas on farmland that are also great hunting. The one thing I will share that when you're hunting private land, because actually most of our pheasant and quail populations are found on private land, we as the DNR own about 1% of the land area in the state for hunting. So 99% of the state is in private ownership. So just by that fact alone means most of our wildlife is found on private land. And so just a few tips if you're seeking landowner permission, because Iowa landowners are very open to hunting. Don't bring big groups. If you're just knocking on the door for the first time, that's going to turn a lot of people off. Landowners get intimidated when a whole group of people there. So it's better to just introduce yourself, you know, bring your son or daughter or bring a friend, you know, unless, you know, they're friends or relatives, and then it may be different. You know, landowners don't have to open their land to hunting, but many of them do. And so, you know, it's always nice to offer them a bird or bring some cheese or wine or at least send them a Christmas card. You know, they don't have to let you on their land. So, you know, showing that you appreciate that is a nice gesture. Don't expect hunt opening day or during the first week, you know, because a lot of times there's friends and relatives that come, but, you know, obviously hunting is a long season in Iowa. And so, you know, you can hunt later. And I guess, you know, respect private property, their gates, their fences, you know, driving on their land, you know, keep them closed, maintain their fences. You know, a lot of times they don't want you driving, so park on the road. And like I said, in person is best. Um, you know, calling somebody on the phone and they've never met you, you're probably not going to have as much success as if you show up in person and take the time to get to know them and visit with them. So this is just an example of our hunting atlas. Shows all of our walk-in areas in orange, all of the state lands in green, Fish and Wildlife Service and County Conservation Boards in blue. And so you can click on any of these areas and it'll actually bring you in and show you the boundaries of the area, and you can see the habitat types. This map, obviously there's some wetlands in there, so there's some good cattail cover in there. It looks like we have some food plots, some grassy cover, and so this looks like it'd be a good pheasant quail area. It's up in the central part of the state. But there's descriptions when you click on this, you know, that shows you what species are likely to be found there. So excellent resource. Just go to www.iowadnr.gov and click on the hunting atlas. You can do this on your smartphone and bring it up as well. So excellent resource for those folks looking for public land to hunt on. And here's where some of our walk-in areas are, our Iowa Habitat and Access Program. So this is a lot of times private CRP that we've helped landowners do some management on. In exchange for that, they allow public access. And so these are all found on the hunting atlas as well, in addition to our publicly owned lands. So I'm going to share one video with you. You know, having a canine friend is always a plus when you're bird hunting. Pheasants are very good at hiding, and so are quail, and so a canine friend with a good nose that can smell them is a definite asset to finding the birds and also recovering them after you shoot them. A lot of times they may be cripples, and so a dog is pretty invaluable when you're out there chasing pheasants and quail. But you don't need a dog. There's a lot of people that hunt pheasants and quail without a dog. Just means you have to spend a little boot leather and kind of be your own dog and walk the cover. And so with that, I will wrap up my part of the presentation and I will turn it back over to Jamie.
Thank you, Todd. We do have some questions for you that came in while you were talking there. We'll get to those, but great job. We've got a lot of the information that Todd shared has been entered into the chat. You can get onto the small game page on Iowa DNR's website as well. But Todd, a couple of questions for you right out of the gate here, sir.
Sure.
We had a question come in. Let's see here. It's from Megan. She said, you mentioned that quail form coveys to conserve energy during cold Iowa winters. Do they still form coveys in the southern portion of their distribution? So I would imagine deeper into the south would be the idea there, Todd.
So yeah, if you get down into like Georgia and Florida and Alabama, they still do covey up, even down there. You know, it might be a little bit later. You know, our birds here in Iowa are probably coveying up already. Down there where it's a little warmer, you know, the covey formation might be a little bit later in October, but even down in Florida and Alabama, you know, they can get some cold nights and it can get down to freezing. And, you know, it ain't very often they get snow in Georgia, but they occasionally do. And so, yeah, that's a behavior that you see across the entire range.
Thank you. Well, there's one other question, Todd, that I think you can answer probably better than anybody here. It's it's from your neck of the woods, I should say. So here it is. It says, where can I hunt pheasants at in the Boone area? So Where's Todd's honey hole? Do you have one nearby?
Well, I hunt a lot of private land, so I probably can't divulge where those are because it's the landowner's discretion. But the public land that I typically hunt around here, actually, I'll go up to Wright County. We have some big complexes up there. Matter of fact, that one picture with the sign. Um, I'm trying to think of the name of that. Lower Morris Lake Complex, very big complex, 2,000 acres. It's a very good area. Right in Boone, Harrier Marsh is a good area. Like I said, the DNR can't buy land everywhere. We need to have willing landowners, and land is expensive. We'd like to buy more, but we do need money to buy land and willing sellers. But another area that'd be good in Boone County or close by would be over in Story County. We have Paul Arrington Marsh, and we have the Chaco Wildlife Area that's managed by the Polk County Conservation Board and us jointly. So there's a couple good areas. I would encourage that viewer to hit that hunting atlas. You can zoom right in and see all those areas and the details on them.
Well, excellent. Todd, thank you again so much. One last question here, and then we'll get to Dustin and the regulation section. A question come in from Chris Anderson. It said, what impact did the derecho have on bird populations? I know you said something a minute ago that made me think derecho as well. So, and I'm sure I'm butchering that term, but anyway, any answer for that one?
Yeah, so that's a question we got quite a bit. So those that aren't familiar, central Iowa from about Jefferson all the way over to Davenport was hit by a very strong straight line windstorm on August 10th, with the winds clocked at 120 to 140 miles an hour. And so many areas of the state, right here where I'm located in Madrid, all the way over to Cedar Falls and Davenport, folks were without power for a week or more, just because of the destruction. You could see the corn damage from satellite across the entire stretch of the state from Madrid to Davenport. So, of course, a lot of people are like, what'd that do to pheasants? Because we had a pretty mild winter and we had a pretty good nesting season. So, people are pretty excited about this fall. I think we're going to have a good fall. It's hard to say. It was a major rainstorm. There was 2 inches of rain, high winds. The chicks should have been fairly grown by that point, half to 3/4 grown. We did get some hail. It wasn't big, about pea-sized. We get larger hail, we can kill birds. I don't think it was quite big enough, but I did a pheasant route in Boone County right after that, and I counted a pretty good number of birds on it, actually more birds than I counted last year. And that was after the derecho. It was like August 20th, and the derecho hit on the 10th. So at least on that one route, it didn't seem like it had a big impact, but I'm not saying it didn't, but I think it was pretty minor.
Yeah. Well, again, Todd, thank you so much for your expertise and your time with us tonight. We're going to be now switching over to Dustin Amy, our conservation officer out of the central Iowa region. But Todd, again, thank you for coming out and helping us tonight.
Yep, glad to do it. I'll be here through the end.
Perfect. So you heard it from Todd. If you've got more questions, he'll be on there to be able to answer some of your questions. Thanks for sending them in. We're doing our best to answer those questions as they come in. Again, make sure you submit a question for a chance to win a t-shirt. Right? Let me hold it up right here. Chance to win a t-shirt. So make sure you're entering your questions in there so we can answer them. Dustin, it is go time for you, sir.
All right. Well, again, thanks for having me on here again tonight. I helped with the virtual dove class and had a really good time with that. And they were kind enough to invite me back to share the regulations with you folks tonight. So Todd did a wonderful job on the history of the pheasants there and the quail. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the hunting regulations that go along with upland game hunting here in Iowa. So I will start my screen here. All right. So one of the first things that we need to cover is hunter education. So if you're first time hunter here in Iowa and you've never took hunter education and you're over the age of 16 and older, and you were born after January 1st, 1972, then you would need to complete a hunter education course in order to obtain a hunting license here in Iowa. For those out of state, we do accept those out of state hunter education classes. We accept those here in Iowa too, if you're going to get a non-resident hunting license as well. So the hunter education there, you can see the web address. You can click on that to find a course. If you can't find a course, you can also call that number there, our Des Moines office, and check to see where a course near you might be. With COVID and everything, there might be potential cancellations of in-person hunter education courses. We are conducting them now. But if you're not able to find a course that fits your schedule, we don't want you to miss out on this upcoming hunting seasons this fall. So here's some recommendations from the DNR. Obviously, anyone age 15 years and younger are able to participate in hunting activities if they're accompanied by an adult 18 years and older who holds a valid hunting permit. Anyone ages 16 to 17, and actually anyone that's older than that, can purchase what we call an apprenticed hunting license to hunt alongside an adult that is 18 years and older who also holds a valid hunting permit. So that apprentice license, we started that there a few years ago for those individuals that were interested in hunting here in Iowa that maybe didn't want to go out and buy all the gear or spend all the time with the hunter education class. And we're allowing them to go ahead and purchase that apprentice license, which includes the hunting and the habitat, which you need. And we'll talk about that here in a second. And you can go out and you can be basically hunting alongside an adult that's 18 years or older with a hunting license and habitat fee, and they're mentoring you essentially. You cannot go and hunt by yourself with that. If you decide that you like it, which we hope you do, then you can go ahead and take a hunter education class, and that apprentice license that you purchase, which includes the hunting and habitat, is good until it expires on January 10th. So, and you can go hunt by yourself after you complete that course. Anyone that's ages 18 and older can also complete the required hunter safety course online, and you can sign up for those classes on that website as well. So required licenses needed to upland hunt here in Iowa. Pretty simple. You need your small game hunting license and your habitat fee. And again, if you're 15 years and younger, you can hunt with an adult that is licensed without buying those licenses. And if you're a landowner, you don't need to purchase any hunting licenses to hunt on your own property as well. Couple easy ways to purchase your licenses now. We're up to speed with technology nowadays. So if you want to go to your App Store or Google Play Store, you can download our free app for the DNR, Go Outdoors Iowa, and you can purchase your licenses directly from your phone. The cool thing about the phone is you can show your officer your license right there in the field off of your phone. When you click on My Licenses, it'll sync your current licenses that you've purchased, and you can show the phone, and we accept those right there. Just make sure that you've purchased it before an officer stops to talk with you. But you do have to show a license to an officer if they approach you in the field or in the parking lot on private or public land, and provide us a license document that shows that you're licensed to be out there hunting. So that is a great app. You can also check your sunrise and sunset times on there, and also report your deer and turkey all through that nice little app there. Before we get into the seasons and our bag limits and possession limits and stuff, just a little quick kind of what is the difference between those bag limits and possession limits. So our bag limit, when we talk about how many pheasants or quail or partridge or rough grouse that we may shoot, is the daily bag limit, which is basically the maximum number of game allowed to be taken by one person in any one day during the open season. So if you go out hunting in the morning and your bag limit is 3 pheasants, you can only shoot those 3 rooster pheasants and no more per person, okay? You can't shoot anyone else's daily bag limit. You can only shoot your daily bag limit. If you shoot 3 in the morning, that doesn't mean you can go home and take a nap and watch the Packers play. You can't come back out in the evening and shoot 3 more. It's just during that one day for the 3 daily bag limit. Your possession limit is the maximum number of any kind of game that may be kept by a person at any time. So if we'll talk about possession limits here in a little bit, but if your possession limit is 12 at home in your freezer, you can't go over that possession limit at any time. So if you have 4 good days of pheasant hunting and you shoot your daily bag limit every day, you're going to be at your possession limit at home unless you decide you want to make some pheasant omelets in the morning and eat some pheasants before you go hunting again. So if you get your maximum possession limit of 12 and you eat a couple pheasants in the morning, so you're down to 10, even though your daily bag limit is 3, you can only go and shoot 2 pheasants that day because you would reach your maximum possession limit at home of 12. Our pheasant season here opens on October 31st and it ends January 10th of 2021. We have a youth pheasant season, which is October 24th and 25th here in Iowa. And that is only for the youth. And they need to be accompanied by a licensed adult to go hunting, okay? Our daily bag limit, which I just talked about for Iowa, is 3 rooster male pheasants, which you can see in the picture there. That is a rooster male pheasant with the beautiful bright colors there on its head. During our youth season, they're only allowed 1 rooster male pheasant during the youth season. Our possession limit for roosters, which I just explained in our scenario there, is 12 rooster male pheasants. And for the youth season, it's 2 rooster male pheasants. So the youth is able to shoot essentially 1 on the 24th and 1 on the 25th. Now the youth can go during the regular season and then their possession and daily bag limits would apply for that regular season. Our shooting hours here in Iowa start at 8:00 a.m. and will end at 4:30 p.m. And if you're like me, I start seeing pheasants coming to the gravel roads and come out and kind of mock me a little bit about 4:35. So they like to come out, and we're going to give them a little bit of a rest, and we can't hunt past that 4:30 p.m. shooting time. So it's 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. You cannot go and hunt and shoot pheasants before or after that time on those shooting hours. For quail season, it opens also on October 31st, but the season extends a little bit longer than that pheasant season. It ends on January 31st of 2021. If you see on your hunting licenses, they expire typically on January 10th of 2021. So if you're going to continue hunting for quail after January 10th, you want to make sure that you purchase your new hunting license and habitat fee to continue hunting on into the end of January there for those quail. Don't want to get caught forgetting that, okay? Our daily bag limit for quail here in Iowa is 8 per day with a possession limit of 16 bobwhite quail for your possession limit. Again, the shooting hours are the same, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Now, Todd had talked about the sexes there. You can see the male is on the right on the bottom there, and the female is on the left. Now, we allow you to shoot both sexes on those quail. And with those pheasants, we only want you shooting the rooster male pheasant. Some parts of the state, depending where you're hunting, I know Todd shared some of those maps with you on where the populations are the heaviest there in Iowa. So if you are up in central, northeast Iowa, you could run across a couple of these other species while you're out there hunting. So just kind of wanted to quick cover what those daily bag limits might look like and possession limits on our gray partridge and our ruffed grouse during those seasons. You're going to see a little bit of difference on the shooting hours there from, pheasant, quail, and the gray partridge versus that ruffed grouse that you might catch up there in Northeast Iowa. So 8 a.m. to 4:30 again on that gray partridge, and then your sunrise to sunset on that ruffed grouse. So that app would come into good play to check the sunrise and sunset times and make sure that you are finished up hunting on those days. And those sunrise and sunset times do change daily by a minute or two every day. So our daily bag limit for gray partridge is 8 with a possession limit of 16. And then on the ruffed grouse there, it's 3 with a possession limit of 6 that you can have at any time at home. Wanton waste and your reasonable attempt to retrieve your game. So while taking or attempting to take game or fur-bearing animals, we don't want you to abandon that injured animal without at least making a reasonable effort to retrieve it from the field. We just don't want you leaving a usable portion of that game in the field. And that's primarily what you would process for consumption, the meat on the animal. So we don't have a time frame that says you need to spend 15 minutes looking for that pheasant or that quail that you might have winged and it landed and ran off into the corn or the cattails or something. The ethical thing is to go over there and spend a reasonable amount of time, make a reasonable effort to retrieve that from the field. We understand that you're not always maybe going to necessarily find that pheasant or that quail, and that's okay. Now, what I do as an ethical thing, I still kind of reduce that to my bag in my head. I'm allowed 3 per day, but if I knock a pheasant down and I can't find it with my dog, or I can't find it with several of us looking for it, and we searched for the whole area for a long time, then I'm only going to shoot 2 pheasants after that, because that bird might go off and die, and it's going to be coyote food or something of that nature. That's just the ethical thing that I do. I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but we want you making a reasonable attempt. So we don't want you wasting that bird out there. Don't shoot a bird and it goes off and flies into the cattails, and the last one you didn't find, so the second one you're not even going to go look for it. That's illegal to do. You have to go make a reasonable effort to find that animal. A lot of people mistake that you can't use lead shot to hunt the pheasants and quail here in Iowa. You can use lead to hunt pheasants and quail and your gray partridge and ruffed grouse. The only time that you can't use lead here in Iowa is for our migratory birds, besides the mourning dove. But you want to be cautious that we do have some wildlife management areas that do require non-toxic shot all the time on those areas. And those are listed on page 19 of our hunting regulations. So make sure that you, before you go hunting in a certain county, check those regulations and look at those to make sure that the area you're going hunting doesn't require strictly non-toxic shot. And at those areas, you're not even allowed to possess lead on your person while hunting. So even if you are using non-toxic shot, we don't want you having lead in your vest or your hunting bag while you're out there and have it in your possession. So be cautious with that. One way to get around that is you could just use a steel shot all the time. I've switched to steel shot on everything that I hunt. Just a quick tip, instead of trying to switch back and forth, if you're hunting several areas during the day, and it could be an honest mistake, but you can get mixed up of where you're going next, and then you'll get caught with that possession of lead shot in your bag on a non-toxic area. One thing that we do require is hunter orange while you're hunting pheasants here in Iowa. Just like deer hunting, we want you to be seen. A lot of these areas that you're going to be hunting, as Todd pointed out in a couple of his photos, is very tall native grasses. And so we want you to be seen by other hunters, your hunting party, and it's the law. So, we want you to have at least wear one of the following articles. It can be a hat, it can be a cap, vest, a coat, a jacket, sweatshirt, a shirt, or coveralls, and at least has to be 50% of its surface solid blaze orange in color. If you're a deer hunter here in Iowa, you can just, if the law's a little bit different there, we require 100% solid blaze orange instead of the 50%. But wear your deer hunting stuff. If it's 100% solid blaze orange, it just means more orange for you to be out there upland game bird hunting, and it's better visibility. I highly always recommend wearing at least an orange hat. If that's all you're going to wear, that's legal, but make sure that you wear that orange hat, because your upper torso in that tall grass is what the other hunters are going to be seeing as well. You can see there in the picture that that Vizsla there carrying the rooster has orange on as well. I always think it's a great idea to put orange on the dog. A lot of people tend to forget what those dogs are doing as they're pointing that bird out in front of you. Some people have pointing dogs. Some people have flushing dogs, meaning they run in there and they don't necessarily point, but you can tell when they're birdie, and they'll flush the bird up. You never know what that dog's going to do all the time. They might jump up after the bird as it's flying away. So you want to be cautious of shooting over that dog, and remind your hunting party to be cautious shooting over that dog. So orange always helps, to be able to see that dog in the brush and know where it's at, so we don't accidentally shoot the dog there. Prohibited hunting near buildings. Here in Iowa, we can't discharge a firearm. We can't shoot or attempt to shoot at a game animal at least within 200 yards of a building inhabited by people or domestic livestock or a feedlot, unless the owner or the tenant has given consent to do so. So if you get permission to hunt private ground, make sure you get consent that you can shoot near their home or near their feedlot, where the livestock's at, and within that 200-yard range. If you're hunting the roadways or the highways, where the habitat's there in the road ditch, know where that 200 mark is. Plan your hunt and hunt your plan. Know you can carry a range finder. You can go to Google Earth, where they have a ruler on there, and plan out on a map where those 200-yard marks are at. So you don't want to get caught shooting within 200 yards there. Be cautious around those livestock and feedlots. We don't want to be firing, a firearm off and scare those livestock through the hunter's fence. That can cost a lot of money and a lot of grief for that farmer as they trample through the fence if we scare them and whatnot. So don't do it unless you have permission on those inhabited buildings. If you're going to and from your hunting grounds, here in Iowa, we have a law where if you're going to carry the gun in the vehicle or on a public highway, you have to have that in a totally contained, securely fastened case, and it needs to be unloaded, fully zipped up. So as is shown in the picture there, the gun's unloaded. We have it in a case. We're not laying it in the back of the seat where, a dog might be jumping up in the seat where a toenail can get in the trigger or something if we accidentally leave it loaded or something. We don't want those accidents happening. And so make sure you have it cased up and unloaded as you're going down the road. Even if it's 20 yards down the road, you've got to have it in a case while you're traveling down the highway. Something that's kind of popular if you don't have a lot of permission on public or private ground and the public ground's kind of overtaken, don't forget about those roadways and the road ditches there. And they could be great spots where hunters will push those birds to those areas, and the cover is pretty good there. So here in Iowa, we do allow you to hunt the public right-of-ways there to the fence. Typically, if the farmer doesn't have a fence, it's usually about 33.3 feet from the center of the road to the edge of the field. And you can kind of tell where that ditch comes up, where the farmer's either done farming, stopped the farming, or where a fence should be. One thing I do caution you about here is if you were to happen to shoot a bird and it falls over onto the private property, we cannot cross over onto that private property with a firearm in our hand. You have to go unarmed to retrieve that bird, and it is not considered trespassing if game or injured game goes onto private property where you legally shot it from. So if the bird gets up out of the ditch, flies up, and you shoot it and it ends up landing over on that private property, unload your firearm, make it safe, point your muzzle in a safe direction, and go retrieve that bird the most direct route in and direct route out if it happens to fall on that private property. You can shoot a shotgun shooting shot shell on or over a roadway there. So if you're walking down the edge of the road there and a bird gets up, just always, again, make sure you know where you're shooting. your target and what's beyond that target, and if any cars or anything's coming down the roadway there and what have you. So if you are successful, which I hope you are this year with the good numbers that we're seeing, when you're transporting your pheasants here in Iowa, you either have to leave a foot, a fully feathered wing, or a fully feathered head attached to that pheasant to be transported within the state. The bird may be field dressed, but the carcass must remain intact. So you see in there in the lower right-hand corner, and Todd did a great job explaining the male and the female there. But on the left-hand side, if I was to approach you in the field and you have those two birds there in your possession, I can't tell whether those are hens or if they're roosters because there's not a fully feathered head, wing, or foot attached. Now, the one in the middle would be legal because I can see that it has the feet attached to it. And it's kind of hard to see on the picture there, but there are spurs right above the foot on the back side of that leg, which are used for fighting other male birds during the breeding season to show dominance. So that male there on the right-hand side, you can see the bright, beautiful colors, is the only thing that we can shoot here in Iowa. We cannot shoot those female hens on the back side. So if a bird gets up and it's in the sunlight, make sure we're identifying our target before we shoot that pheasant. We're yelling out to others if it's a hen, 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 or rooster, rooster, rooster. And obviously, if we don't have a good shot and can't ID it, we're not going to take that shot at that bird. We need to practice before the season. So a lot of people out in the fields right now, training their dogs, getting their dogs in shape. And a lot of people do it throughout the whole time or whole season, throughout the time, you know, starting early on. And just wanted to kind of brush up on this. If you are out training your dogs on our wild game birds, you do need a valid hunting license and habitat fee to train your bird dogs on game birds. You can use a pistol, a revolver, or other gun shooting blank cartridges while training them during the closed hunting seasons. March 15th to July 15th, we don't allow any dogs on our state game management areas. That's the nesting season. We don't want you out there harassing the birds there while they're trying to nest. So any state-owned game management area, we don't allow dog training on our game birds. The only exception to that is you can train on permitted designated training areas. And I'll tell you how to get in contact with your local conservation officer, or you can contact your local wildlife biologist or look on our website to find those designated training areas. I'm not saying they're in every county, but some areas do have those designated areas where you can go train your dog. We do allow you to buy pen-raised game birds from a private game breeder. Either sex may be used and shot in the training of bird dogs. But before any birds released or used in the training of dogs, they must be banded with a band from the DNR. And so you can contact our DNR office at that phone number there in order to order those bands and tag your birds with it before you go out and hunt. Well, I hope we don't ever have to discuss this with you. But sometimes accidents, and they happen, and we have a few every year. But anyone, and just touching up on this, anyone involved in a hunting accident involving a firearm that results in a personal injury or property damage exceeding $100, you must report that accident within 12 hours to the sheriff's office in the county where the accident occurred, or to the local conservation officer. But if neither are available and it's between the hours of 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, you can contact the Des Moines office as well. So obviously the first important thing is, you know, we want you to get to medical help, get those people to the hospital, but you need to report that accident by law to the officer or the sheriff's office. And if you have any other questions, not everyone is from Dallas County where I work. You can go to our hunting regulations, which you can download off of the website to have a PDF in the field, or you can grab a regulations from any sporting goods store usually, or wherever you purchase your licenses from. Walmart, Bass Pro, Shields, we try to keep those all stocked up on hunting regulations. But on page 52, you'll see a list of all the conservation officers in the state of Iowa for each county. Some of them have a little bit of vacancies there where we're trying to get officers hired for those counties. But for the most part, if you call that number, it'll lead you to another number of an officer that you can reach on a nearby county that can maybe answer those questions for you. But those are all listed. Those numbers are there for you to use 24/7, 365 days a year. We'll be responding back to you with if you leave a voicemail and we're busy, or through a text message. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions, and also the successes that you have in the field. We're always excited to hear about that. Or you contact your local officer in your county, and they might know some hot spots where you can take the youngster hunting and get on those areas that maybe they're seeing more bird numbers and not as much activity there. So again, like Todd mentioned, opening day is usually real busy. Those first couple days or those first couple weekends, so be patient. It seems like a lot of those people will fall off the face of the earth there in the middle of the season and tend to forget about the pheasant season as it goes on into January 10th. And that first snowfall can be great. The crops are coming out early this year. Everything's a little bit early. And I've been seeing a lot of good numbers of pheasants and quail out there if you hit Southern Iowa where I'm from. And so I wish everybody success, and I'll stop it here. And I probably have some questions to probably answer for you.
You sure do. You sure do, Dustin. Thanks again for doing a good job tonight. Some of the questions that I've got some of the panelists. Hopefully they can check some of them too. And we'll get these answered here as we wrap up your session. So question came in, and it comes up. I had a buddy comes up from Kentucky every year and pheasant hunts. But he and I had this discussion once. The question is, what do officers do to prove if someone is over their possession limit?
What does someone do to prove that they're
how do officers prove if someone's over their possession limit?
Well, good question. It's a lot of, we're investigators. So either we're watching you hunt and you don't know it, and we could be watching the whole hunt from the start to finish. So we already know what happened as you reach that parking lot. But you want to reduce the pheasants that you shot to your bag, your vest, and carry your birds and only your birds back to the field. So it's not party hunting like it is in deer hunting. And same as waterfowl. We don't party hunt with waterfowl. You're only shooting your birds and your birds only and no more. So if you get back to the parking lot and an officer shows up, don't have your birds in a pile all together. So 2 people hunting, 6 birds laying there. Have them separated, ready to go for the officer to check. And obviously, if we just show up, we're going off of the honesty, integrity. But we have our ways of questioning and getting to the truth and figuring that out. So good question.
Yep, absolutely. Here's another question that come in. If you buy the plastic card with your license, is your license reloaded to that card each year, or do you need a new card each year? And so I pegged around. I didn't know the answer to that. I got Megan to look it up for us, and you do have to get a new card every year. So
unfortunately, when you buy that hard card, which is $5, and it's a great option. It keeps the license nice. It's like a credit card. It's plastic. If you're like me, I collect licenses and keep licenses. So it's kind of more of a collectible hard card for me. We change the artwork every year now. This is the 2nd year. And so it's just another feature that money goes to Habitat. But unfortunately, when you purchase that hard card, the licenses at that time or what's going to go on that card, you can't re-upload it and get a new one. You'd have to purchase a new one if you buy licenses for fall turkey hunting and you maybe purchased it in the springtime. So yes, you do have to purchase one every year. It's not uploadable.
Thanks, Dustin. Yeah, that's a great question and good comment about what those dollars go towards. Last couple of questions are connected here. What if you accidentally shoot a hen if it flies up at the same time the rooster does? So it's one of those, eclipse situations where maybe you've got a bird in front of the other? What's the right thing to do there, Dustin?
Right things to do is call your conservation officer and admit that you shot the hen and you made a mistake. That's going to go a long way with that officer. And we're going to work with you on that when we show up. We're not going to allow you to keep that hen, but it's going to be a very educational moment on that, making sure we have a nice, clean shot with that bird, and maybe letting it clear. We understand that mistakes happen, and we want to educate that on you. We're not out there to take you out of the game. You mentioned earlier with R3, we want to recruit hunters and teach them the most ethical thing to do. And the ethical thing to do is to call an officer when you make that mistake and turn yourself in with that. We're not going to ding you and hammer you with a violation at that time. Now, if this continues to happen every week, we might need to have a sit-down lesson and talk about that with some paper. But in most instances, every officer is going to have a good discretion on that and teach that individual that they did do the ethical thing by calling an officer to report that.
Thanks, Dustin. Again, great answers. Last question here, and then we're going to take probably a short break, maybe 3 minutes, allow people to get up and stretch real quick, get something to drink, hit the restroom, whatever they need to do, and then we'll come back and visit with Amy from North Polk Pheasants Forever. Last question. When you go get your bird, you mentioned this a minute ago, when you go get your bird, you leave your firearm, in your car, wherever, and you go onto that property unarmed. What do you do if the landowner tells you to leave?
So we never want you to get in a confrontation with that landowner. Obviously, what it looks like from a landowner standpoint is you're trespassing, and they do probably come down there and the smoke's rolling out of their ears, their face is red, they're mad at you, they're not listening to anything that you have to say. My suggestion at that point is back out, don't get in a confrontation, and call your local conservation officer. The pheasant is not worth getting in a fist fight over with the landowner over that point. So you can call the local conservation officer, or you can call your local sheriff's office, and maybe they will come out and educate that landowner on our retrieval laws versus not trespassing. Another suggestion is if there's a farmstead there and you don't feel comfortable going and getting that bird, then maybe go on down the road and knock on the door to see if anybody's home and explain the situation to them. That would kind of alleviate that. Then they can come back. Maybe they'll come out there and help you look for it and have two sets of eyes. Maybe you form that relationship with them and they don't like pheasants and they want you to go out there and hunt their property, and you might gain that relationship as well. So could be a win-win situation for you there, but never should you get in a confrontation with the landowner. We don't want you doing that at all. But you can also educate them and explain to them. If they want to listen to you, then tell them the law and tell them the story, what happened, and maybe that's all that's needed. So every situation is different and fluid.
Okay, very good. We did have a question that was entered. It came in as a comment, so I didn't see it right away. So last question here for your section. For youth season, at what point in the hunt does the youth have to take possession of the firearm?
Well, good question. We're obviously probably not taking our 3-year-old out there and giving them a gun to walk around. So I'm going to leave this up to the adult parent, what they feel is the most comfortable time to take their kid hunting, where they're able to handle that firearm. We don't want the adults cannot be handling the firearms at any time during that youth hunt. It is a mentored youth hunt. We want them to be in direct contact, walking with them, talking to them, teaching them all the way through. And that might not even be loading the firearm up at all. I remember my first several hunts as a youngster with my dad. I never had a loaded firearm. He was watching me where I was pointing that muzzle at all times. He was watching me what I would do when the bird would get up. If the dog happened to hold that bird on point, then he would let me load that firearm as I was standing there, and he was directing me to pull up and take the shot. But that's up to the parent, the common sense there, how they feel. If the kid is not able to walk with the gun and point that muzzle in a safe direction, maybe we should wait a few more years until they're able to do that.
Good point, Dustin. I know with some species, even packing a BB gun along that's unloaded, no BBs on
Sure.
you. We talked about that with the dove hunt a few weeks ago. Teaches them muzzle control and how to carry that in the field. So valid
Absolutely.
point.
Take that BB gun, have that youngster go with you, maybe not during youth season, but when you're out there hunting and walking right beside you and constantly reminding them where their muzzle's pointing, where the safety is. And as you pull up on that bird that you're going to shoot, you could be watching them or tell them to pull up and practice that too. So there's no issues there whatsoever.
Well, great job again, Dustin. So one final thing, I know you alluded to it, but I had to do it. So go pack, go. You said can't ditch the house to go watch the Packers play, but anyway, had to do it. Couldn't resist. So we're going to take a quick 3-minute break for you all tuning in from home. We're going to kill the screen. It'll go back to our main slide that you all saw when you came on. We'll take a quick 3 minutes to allow you all to get up, allow some of our panelists to get up, and we will come back sharply at 7:44. And we'll start with Amy Buckendahl with North Polk PF. We're going to be pushing past the 8 o'clock mark just a bit, but you guys are still tuning in, and we're going to sit here with you until it's over. We'll see you in 3 minutes. All right. Well, we are going to get going here again. We're rounding third, headed for home. We've got our third and final session in front of us here. Amy Buckendahl with the North Polk Pheasants Forever chapter is going to talk to us about gear and some general equipment issues that you'll need to get out and enjoy the uplands this fall. Amy has been super involved with our programs at DNR and PF. For the last several years, we've been doing more and more mentored hunts for adults. Some of those taking place out at the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge there with a great partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're a huge contributor to more public acres this year going into public access and last year with their announcement. But Amy and the chapter there in North Polk have been tremendous in providing volunteer support and some financial help. So again, we're excited to have Amy from the North Polk PF chapter here tonight. Representing our organization at what I refer to as its heart and soul, the grassroots. So, Amy, we're going to turn it over to you now, and we'll let you take it from there.
Well, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more about why this kind of stuff is so important. So I've been involved with Pheasants Forever since I was little. My dad was involved in Pheasants Forever. He was a board member in Bremer County in Iowa. He was also worked for the DNR. I also worked for the DNR. Growing up, we always had land to hunt on. I was a farming kid. I grew up in rural Iowa. And about midway through high school, my dad started to do hunter education. And I was shocked to learn when I was helping him with these classes that not everybody had the chance to go out and hunt, to have a mentor or a mom or a dad or a aunt and uncle or something that could take them out and enjoy being outside to hunt, whether it was pheasants or bow or shotgun, whatever. So pushing people to be able to have that opportunity to be outside, to at least experience hunting in some way, whether they do it a couple of times and they enjoy being outside, or they retain that and we can recruit them to make sure that they have the opportunities and the skills that they're comfortable with to be able to make this a part of their life, to make this a pastime. So I'm going to talk a little bit about gear and guns. So I'm going to show my screen here with everybody. So one thing that you'll have to bear with me is it's hard for me to see your questions as I'm talking. So if I'm ignoring your question, please don't be upset. I promise I'll get to it here at the end. So like Jamie said, the reason this is so important is we want to recruit, retain, and reactivate hunters that maybe got to do it as kids, but then life got in the way, family got in the way, your job. This is an opportunity for folks to be able to learn something new or to revive old skills so they can be out doing something fun outside. So just as a reminder, for those of you who might not know that have been longtime hunters or new hunters, but the participation trends in hunting and recreational shooting has been declining since the 80s. Just for those of you on the call, I was born in 1980, so you can imagine the changes that I've seen in my lifetime. Animal hunting and fishing license sales are incredibly valuable for funding wildlife conservation and habitat restoration. So if you remember from Todd's talk earlier, that habitat can really be the key to whether or not we have huntable species between years. Prevents population decline and also increases recruitment for the quail, pheasants, and the other grassland species that he talked about. All of those hunting and fishing expenditures generate billions of dollars. So think of hotels, restaurants, bait stores, local gas stations. I mean, all of those little things add up to supporting thousands of jobs at your local economy and at the national level. We have guys here that hunt in Iowa, but also go out to South Dakota. There's a town out there called Winter, South Dakota, that annually has about $1 million of income from hunting in a year alone. So it can really change the dynamic of these small rural towns when we have folks traveling around hunting and enjoying those recreational sports. So I want to talk a little bit about experts. So I like to think that we have a really great panel here tonight. You'll hear from experts, or you'll see on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter, you'll hear a lot of people talking about experts. I'm always a little wary of people who are self-described experts in the field versus people who are looked to as experts. Always be wary of anyone trying to sell you something. There's a lot of good things out there that you can do for free or near free, or you can make yourself. So don't feel like any of the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight with our guns and ammo and gear, you don't have to spend $1,000 to be good at hunting. And I'm going to explain to you why you can be a thrifty or economical hunter and still be really successful in your hunt. So I'm going to talk a little bit about clothing, shooting vest, your shooting bag, your gloves, your glasses. We're going to talk about weather conditions because that can really make or break your hunt. And it's really not what the conditions are, but how you're prepared for those conditions. You always want to dress for the terrain. So the folks that are hunting out in South Dakota might hunt a little differently than if you were in northeast Iowa, when we have pretty rugged up and down terrain, a lot of morcelliflora rose, some thorny shrubbery, and then of course footwear. I find that having good footwear is going to really help you enjoy your day and be comfortable, and I'll explain a little bit more about that here shortly. We're going to talk about guns and ammo, so 12 gauge versus 20 gauge, pellet size, weight, choke or not to choke, shot selection for your game types, and then understanding public and private lands, what kind of equipment you may want to consider, and also a little bit more about etiquette that Dustin touched on a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about your shooting vest. Your shooting vest is a pretty critical piece of equipment because it's going to hold your stuff. You're not going to want a big heavy backpack out there. It's going to get in your way. It's going to bind your shoulder socket when you're trying to swing up on a bird. So fit and function is going to be super, super important. You see here that this, on the screen here, this is kind of your lower end shooting vest. So it doesn't have arms, it's not super fancy. I forget what this one retails for, but it's not too bad. The only concern that I have about this vest versus some other vest would be if, sorry, I'm just checking a couple of things here. Okay, you guys don't see the screen, so hold on just a second. Let me fix that. Okay, can you guys see that now?
Yeah, we can, Amy. Looking good.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. So
Yep,
let me
no
back up really quick.
problem. Yep.
Okay, so basically the stuff we already talked about, you didn't miss anything on these other screens, which is just my intro page, your recruitment information that we've already discussed. Beware of anybody trying to sell you expensive things if they're calling themselves an expert. What we're going to talk about, guns and ammo. So back to the shooting vests. So when you're picking out a vest, there's a million different kinds of vests that you can choose from. They're long, they're short, they have big pouches, they have small pouches. Basically, you want to go, I'm a big simple is better kind of gal. If you have a lot of stuff on your vest, it can get hooked on things. You want to make sure that mobility is key. So definitely try the vest on. If you're in a sporting goods store, it's great because you can not only try your vest on, you can then walk over to the gun section and you can move gun around. So see how it fits in your shoulder. You see what kind of arm space you have. You want to be able to lower and raise your gun up comfortably. So that's super key when you're picking out a shooting vest. As a reminder, you want to have some, it's not required, like Dustin said, you have to have at least one thing on your body for upland shooting that's camo, or sorry, that's blaze orange. But we're going to talk a little bit about why I always suggest all of my mentees that I work with, whether you're adults or young, to have blaze orange on both your vest and your hat. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But things that you want to remember when you're picking out a shooting vest. Can you walk in your vest for miles? Especially if you're going into western Iowa or southern Iowa, where there's a lot of mileage to walk. You want to practice shooting in your vest. I know it seems silly because it's just something that you wear, but definitely once you get your shooting vest purchased, you know that it fits you. You want to take that out to the gun range with you. Put some shells in it. Make sure that it's comfortable. This is going to be something that's, it's not going to make or break your hunt per se, but it's going to definitely make your hunt a lot more comfortable. There's a couple of different materials that you can get hunting vests out of. I would avoid anything that has flocking on it or like a fluffiness to it. It may feel comfortable in the store, but it's going to attach burrs and briars to it, and that can be really annoying. But the birds don't care if you look cool. So definitely get something that fits and something that has smooth edges so that when you're raising and lowering your gun or you're working with a dog or somebody else's dog that you're comfortable. You can see in this image that this particular vest, baggy vest, has a big pocket in the back. I really like that style. Unfortunately, you can't see it, but just below her elbow is a pocket space. So that way, when you're picking up a bird and you're putting it in the back of the vest, there's a big opening. You don't want to have something that's really, really tiny. And in fact, when you're in the store, I would totally recommend putting the vest on, zipping it, and trying to reach down into that pocket before you purchase it. If it's too small or it's cut funny, I would avoid that vest and move on to something else that's more appropriate. The only real concern I have with this vest in the picture, as you can see that there's buckles on it. So definitely you want to make sure that that's adjusted so that if you lift your gun up, it's not underneath the stock of your gun so you don't get a bruise. It can be uncomfortable. So just those little things, just take an extra 5 minutes when you're going to pick out a vest or borrowing a vest from someone. Keep those things in mind. Just going to double check to make sure I don't have any questions here. I don't see any, so they may have to wait till the end if there is one. So here's the vest that I would recommend. So this one has a full shoulder. There's a little bit of padding in the shoulders. It's got some nice blaze orange to help keep you visible. It's got some zippered fronts for your choke, and it's got nice big pockets for extra shells. So the reason I recommend wearing this along with a blaze orange hat is if you're out walking around and you're sweaty and you take your blaze orange hat off and you don't have any other blaze orange on, suddenly you're no longer in compliance with the hunting regulations in Iowa. So that's why as we're mentoring and we're teaching people, we're talking about this stuff, you want to keep those things in mind so you can have a legal hunt and a safe hunt. So this vest is something that I'd recommend. Browning makes a good one. It's got, if you can see that it's got some venting in on the side. So if you're sweating, you're walking around, you can be a little bit more breathable. So one thing to remember too is a lot of times when we're stored and we're going to buy a vest, we take our winter coat off, right? Or we take our jacket or our hoodie off and maybe throw it in our cart. When you're putting a vest on, remember that it's going to go over all of your gear and your clothes. So always keep that jacket on when you're purchasing a vest. So again, how much blaze is enough? So just to remember that Iowa law requires upland game bird hunters to wear at least one of the following things that has at least 50% of the surface area solid blaze orange. I know a lot of the camo blaze oranges are really popular. I always get kind of worried about that when we're hunting in areas where there's a lot of other hunters. If you have a camo hat on that's got a little bit of flocking of blaze orange in it, that might not be enough to keep you safe. So even though it might look really cool, or it's if there's a hunter that you watch on outdoors and they wear that hat, it might look cool, but it might not keep you safe. So always try to remember, hey, if I'm out in the woods, the visibility isn't so great. This is going to keep me safe and keep me visible. Again, there's the law versus safety. You ever removed a sweaty hat or even taken off your vest? So having a long sleeve blaze orange shirt could also be helpful. So one of the little things, it's a good idea. You don't need an expensive or fancy bag, but I do like how this bag's organized. You can put your chokes in the front. This one's also a kind of a cool double duty one. I'm going to talk a little bit about why practicing is important. So this one can double as a clay bag, take out to the range, but also it can be as a hunting bag too. You definitely want to make sure that it's got enough space for a couple of cases of shells, your hunting gloves, chokes. Definitely want to have a boar snake if it's raining or misty out in the field. You definitely want to clean your gun before you put it away for too long. Keep it oiled, things like that. I grew up this way, and I always try to pass this on to the mentees that we have in our group. Is I always got in the habit of cleaning my gun before I took it out to shoot, and I always cleaned it when I put it away. So no matter what, I was always double checking to make sure that that boar was clean and safe. So definitely dress for success. My dad always taught me that if you hope for the best, but you got to plan for the worst. So layering, I'm always astonished, even in adults, when I start to teach them about layering, how that can be kind of a perplexing thing. A lot of people are like, oh, a t-shirt and a hoodie will do it. Maybe a pair of jeans and some good socks. That is not enough. If you want to have a successful and comfortable and enjoyable hunt, you need to learn how to layer. There's videos online, all kinds of cool information out there that might be even more exciting than the information I'm presenting to you now. But you want to look at it this way. You want to look at your layers in 3 ways. Your base layer. So that's the stuff that goes against your skin. Whether you're a guy or a girl, you're big or you're little, you definitely want to have long underwear on and like something that is better than a t-shirt underneath, that's got some polypropylene, or even if you can afford it, the merino wool that they've been making now is incredibly amazing. It doesn't get stinky, it keeps your sweat off your skin, and it helps you stay dry and clean. That can be good in the summer and in the winter. So your middle layer, that's your insulating layer. If all you have is a hoodie is for an insulating layer, that's okay. I'm going to let that can be recommended. You just want to have something that lofts to be able to hold that warm airspace. And then your outer layer, so your shell layer. You want something that'll keep the wind off you. A lot of the times I see people grab a cheap blast jacket from Walmart and hope to have a good day in the field when it starts to mist. But after you've been walking out there in the rain for about 10 minutes and it starts to drive, that rain is going to penetrate in the seams of your cheap blast jacket, and you're going to get soaked. When you get soaked, you're going to get cold. And when you get cold, you're not going to shoot good. If you're not shooting good, you're not going to be very successful in your hunt, and it's going to shorten your day. With everybody being so busy and family commitments and everything going on in your life, you definitely don't want to waste a day in the field because you got wet. So it's super critical that you be mindful of these base layers so that you can have a successful hunt. Even if you don't end up wearing all the 3 layers on the outset, if you remember those shooting vests that I showed you earlier in the slide, they have pockets. Sometimes they're even divided. So one side can be like an extra layer, like a rain gear, or something to keep the moisture off your clothing. Or even an extra pair of socks. I know that sounds silly to take that in the field, but it's amazing those extra pair of socks can do for you. Obviously, you can peel those layers off if things heat up, but if you don't take it into the field with you, if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to put it on if it doesn't exist. So I always recommend taking a little bit extra gear with you to at least the parking lot, so that you can, if you're not going to go very far, you can always go back to the car and change. But if you're going to walk for miles with some other people, especially if you're out with a mentor and they've got a dog, the dogs, you're going to be able to move pretty far and flush a lot of game and be successful. But if you're going back to the car every half an hour because you get hot and you get cold, it's going to shorten your day. That's probably going to frustrate your mentor a little bit. So definitely plan ahead and be mindful of those things. So there's two kinds of layering for hot and cold weather. So for cool weather, you want that nice, big, fluffy, insulating weather. If it's really hot out, what we'll have here, especially in this kind of Indian summer that I wonder that we're going to start having for pheasant season, you definitely want to layer anyway, even if you think it's going to be warm. If you start to get sweaty, it's going to make it uncomfortable. We'll talk here a little bit about shooting gloves and why that's important. It can help with sweat management in your hands. So anything with like a mid-weight polyester that you can take off is going to be best. Jackets that have some kind of insulation or down are going to be the lightest version. And then, of course, some kind of waterproof, breathable rain jacket. One thing to remember that even though there's no rain in the forecast for the day, if you have rain pants on and you're walking through tall grass in the morning early to try to get a jump on some birds that are still hunkered down from roosting from overnight, you're going to get soaked if you don't have rain pants on. So it's a good idea to definitely wear something that's going to keep you dry, at least on the bottom half of your body. So don't forget your pants. So one thing about rain gear is people are like, well, do I really need to wear rain gear? Well, no, you don't have to wear rain gear, but anything that repels water is going to be good. Because if it starts to rain really, really hard, it just makes it uncomfortable. So some things that we talk about a lot in different areas of Iowa and you know, in the South Dakotas is you want to have something that is appropriate for the terrain. So we talked a lot about weather just now, but I want to talk a little bit about terrain. We have some nasty invasive species in Iowa, that multiflora rose, buckthorn. There's a couple of other ones that have thorns on them, catclaw. And even though the thorns on those aren't super big, like thorns that you'd maybe see on a honey locust, they can be very damaging to your skin, your dogs too, but that's another story. So my two recommendations would be either to get pants in the middle picture. My problem that I have with pants like this is that it's kind of an all or nothing thing. I really like the idea of the chaps that are here on the left-hand side, so that if you do get hot or you're in an area that's just soft grass, you don't need to worry about them. You can just roll them up and put them in the back of your vest and you're set. You can see this picture here that just looks like a little scratch, but those little scratches from multiflora rose, buckthorn, honey locust, those can get really badly infected. And I've seen some pretty horrific bacterial infections from just little scratches. So if you do get scratched when you're in the field, basic first aid is pretty important. Just get a little alcohol swab on it, keep it clean until that scab forms, and then don't pick it. So those are just a couple of extra ways to stay safe when you're out in the field, is make sure that you have gear that's appropriate for the terrain. So there's a lot of different shooting gloves out there. Some of them are hundreds of dollars. You do not need anything fancy like that to be comfortable in upland hunting. So I really like the fingerless gloves because I have a weird sensitivity thing when I'm searching for my safety and my trigger when I'm out hunting. So I like the fingerless gloves best. But these are pretty expensive. These particular shooting gloves I think are about $80. You can go to Menards or Farm Fleet and just get some cheap mechanics gloves for like I think $20 or $30 and you'll be set. It doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to work. My recommendation though is that these fit. You definitely want to go out of your way to make sure that you take the little extra time to make sure that they fit. Kind of like a golf glove for those golfers in the audience. You want that to be snug so you don't lose sensitivity when you're moving your gun around. The gal in the picture here, she's got some super basic shooting glasses. They're $19.95 at Menards. This is nice because they're cheap. So if they fall off and they break, you're not going to be super sad about it. But also if you are coming up over a ridge and a rooster pops up right next to you and you look and you're looking into the sun, these glasses are going to allow you to, it's not just about safety, but it's about sun safety too. You're going to be able to shoot that bird. If you don't have anything on your face, it's going to be a little harder. So shooting gloves and glasses, highly recommend. Does not need to be fancy or expensive. You can get both of these things for less than 30 bucks, or you can borrow them from somebody. So boots, man, if you have blisters or bad feet at the end of your day, it's gonna, or even in the middle, you know, if you're getting to an area where there's really starting to get, you know, the dogs are getting birdy and you're starting to get some action, and you've got blisters because you wore bad shoes. Boots don't need to necessarily be super expensive, but I would expect anywhere from $100 to 200 bucks on your shoe. You want to look for the tread. You can see the guy in the green pants here. These Danner boots, they've got some good tread. That's super important to keep you from slipping in these grassy areas where these birds are nesting. Now, I get a lot of people ask me about, well, Gore-Tex, how important is it? Normally for hiking and camping, Gore-Tex isn't important. In fact, I kind of hate it for those particular adventures because my feet tend to sweat with Gore-Tex. But I can combat that, and you can too if you get good socks. You definitely want a merino wool thin hiking sock. There is a difference between your cotton Hanes socks you get at Walmart. This is where money can come into play. So a lot of the things I talked about already are cheaper, less expensive things. This is where you definitely want to, if you have money to spend and you're budgeting for this, you want to budget for socks and shoes, good socks and shoes. Gore-Tex is great because, like I said earlier, if that grass is wet in the morning and you're trying to get a jump on those birds that are still roosting from the evening, you're not going to want to get soaked. So lace up boots with good ankle protection so you're not slipping and sliding down a slope, dropping your gun and what have you. You want to stay safe. So it's not just a comfort thing, it's a safety thing as well. A lot of the fancy Danner boots, Red Wing, they make a great boot, but they do not make a good insole. So if you have high arches like I do, man, get yourself a pair of good insoles from, not that I'm recommending any particular brand, but Spenco, Superfeet, they all make good stuff. But yeah, socks, insoles, and a good pair of boots, man, you're not going to go wrong there. It's going to definitely increase the time that you're comfortable in the field and much, much more enjoyable. So let's talk a little bit about guns and ammo. So two of the most popular choices are 20 gauge and 12 gauge. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those differences. But before I do, the best gun that you can get is a gun that fits you and a gun that you're going to be able to use regularly. So if you go out and buy a $4,000 Benelli and you only shoot it once or twice, you're not going to be very good with it regardless of how much it costs. But if you get an inexpensive gun or you borrow from somebody and you can go out several times in a week before you go out, and you're going to get comfortable with that gun and you're going to shoot straight and shoot accurate, you're going to have a way better time. So just as a reminder, 20 gauge, for those of you who are looking at what should I get, if you're smaller framed, kind of like I am, that recoil from that 20 gauge is kind of easier and more manageable, especially if you're new to gun hunting. This is a great way to get started. You'll find that the gun's a lot easier to handle. If the gun is easier to handle, if it's easier to bring up to your shoulder, you're going to just be more comfortable with it. It's going to build confidence. If you're confident in it, then you're going to shoot better. I mean, that's just, there's no way around that. No matter how far or how tight or whatever the sales guy tells you, if you're comfortable with the gun because it kicks less, then that's the gun you're going to use. You're going to be successful. So that 12 gauge versus a 20 gauge bait. Especially if you're a shorter shooter like I am, I'm only 5'3", so I definitely like something that's a little bit smaller. I was always taught, and this is something that you'll learn too in hunter safety, for those of you who might not have gone through it, is you don't shoot at something if you don't know what it is. Always ID your target and always make sure you're confident in your shot. Don't be winging stuff out there and hoping it falls down. You definitely want to make sure that you're comfortable. Kind of goes back to that practicing thing. So you might want to lean toward that smaller, comfortable range, but that 20 gauge recoil is manageable and easier for most people. However, when it comes to velocity and energy, that 12 gauge is going to win virtually any fair comparison. So if you're the kind of guy that maybe, you know, there's a couple ways to look at this. If you don't have dogs and the birds are getting up way ahead of you because you're stumbling or you're breaking brush or whatever, 12 gauge might be beneficial because you're gonna be able to shoot further. The velocity is good. You know, velocity and speed. I mean, those are just two things to remember. So we get that 20 gauge. It's going to be super comfortable, going to not have a ton of kick. We're going to talk a little bit about different loads here in a second, but I guess those are just kind of some two things to think about. If you have the opportunity to borrow two of these guns at a shooting range from a friend, I would really recommend that. That'll really get you on target and on site. We're going to talk a little bit about ammo. So Federal Premiums, there's a lot of different gun or ammo manufacturers out there. Federal Premium, for example, they'll make these 2.75 inch shells. They got Savage slugs in them for the 12 gauge, and they have the 20 gauge. So the difference for this particular example, just to kind of give you an idea. So the muzzle velocity will be about 1,500 feet with 21,000 foot poundage. 20 gauge, however, will have slightly less at 1,450 with an energy of 17 feet per second, or 1,700 feet per second. So go back to this earlier slide where I'm talking about comfort over velocity. If you're not comfortable shooting a 12 gauge, don't. Get comfortable shooting your 20 gauge and be a better shot and have a better harvest. So just a reminder, I'm going to hammer this home: practice, practice, practice. I can get you the most expensive gear, the most expensive guns, and the most expensive dog, and the most expensive ammo. But if you don't practice, you're not going to have a good hunt. And here's my recommendations, and this is the recommendations that I give to all of my hunter safety people, the adults and kids alike. You want to shoot from several different yardages. So try it from 10, get comfortable with that. Shoot from 20, and then shoot from 30. So the average pheasant will get up in front of you anywhere from 20 to 30 yards away, depending on a lot of things. Wind, rain, if you have a dog. Anything after over 30 yards is going to be a lot harder to hit. So unless you practice, 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 plan on that 30 yards as being kind of the limit there. And then also shoot variable load. So maybe a 3 versus a 5 or a 4 versus a 5. Practice that and see if it makes any difference. For some people, my stepdaughter, she swears that she can tell the difference between a 4 and a 5 just in comfort level and in her shot patterns. You're going to enjoy your time in the field a lot more if you practice. It's going to build confidence and skill. So here's a little imagery here. So for a 20 gauge 8 shot, you can see that at 25 feet, it's got a pretty big pattern. And then your 12 gauge, it's going to go further, so made that kind of whole pattern there. And then you can see these enhanced pictures. So we're going to talk a little bit about chokes, because you're going to probably want to either use a modified. I mean, everybody kind of has their thing, but an improved or modified are the two most popular. I usually shoot with an improved. My husband usually shoots with a modified, so it's kind of just your flavor of the day. So you can see here the effects of choke on the shot string at those distances. So that top one is your cylinder. You got 25 yards. You get the different sizes. The improved cylinder and the you can see there the choke size, 30 yards. That's why we always recommend improved cylinder, 30 yards. It's a great upland hunting gun, or choke rather. And then the modified, and then of course a full choke. And that'll really blast some birds. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why you might want to avoid a full choke. You know, whether you're hunting on private land or whatever, just you're going to blow your bird apart, and the birds that you do drop, it's going to be a little chunky. So here again, you can see how the barrel shape of that, or not the barrel shape, but the choke affects how those pellets come out of the barrel. So that full choke really, it zeroes in that smaller, tight, further. I apologize, you can't read these words, but basically it's just the same thing that we discussed. Modified choke and improved cylinder. You can see how it changes that pattern as that's moving out of your gun. So just a reminder, improved and modified choke. It's going to increase your chance of success just because you're going to be able to shoot in a pattern that's good for pheasant and quail as they blow up out of the grass at your feet. So you can see here this full choke. You can see the distance compared to the modified and improved choke. That little red dashed line is the limit of where you're going to be successful at clipping that bird. So you can just see how the improved choke, it's got a little bit wider range or wider patterning, but it's a little bit shorter ranged. It's good if the bird's kind of flying at a weird angle or maybe coming up over a rise. So how are you choosing ammo? Well, the first thing you got to remember is where you're hunting. So Dustin talked about it a little bit, and public ground requires non-toxic shock when it's posted. I think Landon asked a question earlier, like, well, if it's not posted, can I hunt with whatever? So the answer to that is yes and no. You want to make sure that the parcel or property that you're hunting on for public land does not require non-toxic shot. Just because there's no sign, don't assume that you're in the clear. We have people, I'm sure Dustin could probably, or any land manager can tell you that people love to steal our signs. There's many DNR signs that grace a garage or man cave around the state of Iowa and in surrounding states. So make sure that, do a little research on the place that you're going to hunt at to make sure that you have the right gear. So why is that important? Public ground requires a non-toxic shot for most of the areas because the lead shot is really damaging to our raptor population, bald eagles, ducks, even just a tiny fragment of a lead shot that's ingested from a gut pile from an eagle. And when it comes to deer hunting, or a missed pheasant, for example, eagles in the state of Iowa, we kind of joke that they're not really the fancy predatory raptor that people like to think. Man, they love to eat dead stuff. Stuff that's left in the field or along the side of the road. That's an easy meal for them. That's kind of like fast food. And if there's lead particles in it, that bird's going to die. It's a pretty painful death too. It starts out with some neurological problems. The birds can't fly, they can't walk, they have trouble seeing, and then they eventually starve to death. I think it takes about 3 weeks for a bald eagle to starve to death if they've been poisoned by lead shot. So it's not because we're trying to be controlling or take away your rights or tell you what to do. It's because we're trying to be what's good for the resource. Steel's pretty darn cheap now. Man, bismuth and some of those other shots have come a long way. They're a lot more affordable than they were when I was a kid. And man, they're good. I mean, you can get a nice tight pattern with them. They travel further. So just a little reminder for those of you who don't know much about slugs at all, here's what the size differences are and buckshots versus birdshot, and then the slugs for like deer hunting. So what's the best ammo for pheasant hunting? I think some of the guys had answered this earlier, but just as a reminder, pheasant hunters like 4 to 5 lead shot using a modified or improved choke. 5 is probably the most common load, and so that means it's going to be probably the cheapest. And then the modified choke being a good starter. So if you have no idea what you're doing and you want to buy your own stuff because you don't have a mentor or anybody to teach you, go ahead and get some number 5 shot, get a modified choke with with the gun of your choice that's affordable, and go to a gun range and start to practice. So quail hunting. So you're going to want to pick the 6 or 7s. It's good for quail. Also, woodcock is a popular hunting bird in Iowa, and I think in Wisconsin and maybe Missouri. So they're a fun bird to shoot. The extra speed with those steel loads is kind of necessary as me and those quail are smoking along. It's also a little bit lighter than lead. You can go farther. So here's a nice visual depiction here. So you can see here the BB down here in the bottom corner of that penny picture. So you can see the size of just a normal BB from a BB gun that a lot of us got to play with and maybe still do. So you can see your 2, 4, 5s. So your 5 being the most popular, and then 6, 7 as they get smaller. So just remember that it's the opposite of what you would think. So your 2s are your biggest, then your 4s, 5s, 6s are smaller, 8s and 9s, and then your tiny shot there. at your 12. So why is shot quality important? Why would I want to use a 5 over a 6 or a 4 over a 3? If you're, you definitely want to make sure that you're using the appropriate size shot for the type of bird you're shooting at, which is why we recommend a smaller shot size for quail, because you don't want to blow those things apart and fill them full of metal. It just makes the food better. It's easier to clean if you've got a couple of pellets in your bird versus a whole bunch of little pellets. So it's really just something to keep in mind when you're, you know, if you've been pheasant hunting for a while and somebody's like, hey, let's shoot some quail, you can definitely do that. Just kind of be mindful about the type of shot that you're using. It's going to make it taste better and it's going to be easier to clean. Again, practice. What is your effective range? If a bird blasts up at 35 yards, are you going to be able to hit it? Or if you're party hunting, so this is another good reason why it's important to practice. So if you're party hunting and you've got 5 guys and you got one guy that's just got super eagle eye and is just nailing everything, but he's further out of range and you're closer and you can get that bird and you know your effective range is at 20 yards, then take that shot. Call it. You say rooster. Call that shot or shoot or whatever it is language that you guys have agreed upon before you've been out in the field. And then the thing is, if you're group hunting, make sure you have a powwow before you go out. So what happens if hen pops up? Usually in the groups that I'm out with, we just say hen, hen. But if a rooster pops up, we say shoot. We don't say rooster, we say shoot, shoot, shoot. It's just a way that, or if we say I got it. So if you're close and that bird pops up in front of you, you say I got it. Or if it's too close to you and there's no way you're going to get a good shot at it, you just get out of the way and let somebody else take a shot. So just kind of some last minute things on your list of things to take out for your gear is multiple coolers. That way you can divvy up the birds, each car for each person. Just make sure you follow the possession limits and leave a wing on for the pheasants to make sure you know that it's a male bird. Knives, shears, latex gloves, just make it super easier to clean up faster. Paper towels, baggies, garbage bags. Water for your group members. Man, staying hydrated is going to make it a lot easier way to drive home. If you have dogs, and then a snack or granola bar in the field, put that in that vest we talked about earlier. So thanks guys, questions, comments, inappropriate remarks. I'm here to take it all. Let me back out of this so I can actually see your questions here. And hopefully this kind of inspires you to know that you don't have to spend $1 million to hunt. You can do this all for less than probably $100, especially if you have a borrowed gun.
Great job, Amy. Nope, you covered it all. We've got some great stuff there. I don't think we've had too many questions to come in. I'm checking here though, just to make sure. Looks like you covered it. I loved how you reminded people of a couple of things. You know, the first thing was that you can't trust the signs sometimes on public land. I'm glad you brought that up. Socks, oh my goodness, socks are so important. Good shoes and good socks. I just started pheasant hunting myself about 3 years ago, and I had no idea how crucial footwear was going to be. So worthwhile investment. But you did a fantastic job. You covered a lot of great information. Again, we're grateful for you and for you taking some time tonight to help us out. And I love that the tone you set too. You just talked about how beware of self-appointed experts, because we all look at things differently. So anyway, thanks again, Amy. So that pretty much concludes our night 1 session. We're just going to let some other questions maybe come in here too. Looks like we're starting to get some thank yous, but before we cut everybody loose, we're going to make sure that you all know what we've got going on next week on the 13th. Again, from 6 to 8 p.m. We're going to invite you to join us a week from tonight. We're going to have several panelists again discussing hunting strategies, safety in the field, dogs, how to hunt with dogs, how to plan to hunt with dogs. We may touch on a little bit of dog training, but we're looking to assemble a panel of hunters who've got some experience with that, would be willing to share that with you all. And then we're going to have Rose Danaher. She's with the Iowa County PF chapter. She's an avid bird hunter, loves to hunt, mostly because of her dogs, but she also likes putting food on the table as well. She's going to be sharing with you all about how to clean a bird and sharing some of her recipes that she's used over the years. So we're looking forward to spending some time with Rose next week. So again, you all will be receiving some follow-up emails in the next week or so. It's going to have all the links that were sent out tonight over the chat system and over the chat feature. So keep looking for that in your inbox. Along with that will come a survey. We want your honest feedback. It's the only way that we can really improve these virtual Learn to Hunt programs and sessions. Again, you all should be able to hop online tonight. If you're interested in trapping, we've got a series coming up in a couple of weeks, October 20th, October 22nd. We'll be doing a Learn to Trap workshop as well with Vince Evelsicer and some other folks from the Iowa DNR. So be sure to check out that as well. Again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. We're excited that you all hung around with us. We are willing to take questions. Join us, consider joining us next week. And again, we thank you all for hopping out. Amy, Dustin, Todd, Eric, all of you all, thank you all for helping us out. And we'll see you next time.